Good afternoon, everyone. We do have all our members of Civic Works. So we have Matt Quorum. Welcome to the 5th meeting of the Civic Works Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats of communication and supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please visit accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact cwc@london.ca. I'm going to look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest from committee. Okay, seeing none on the consent items, I've been given advance notice to pull 2.13, being the Green Bin Program Design Community Engagement Feedback, as well as 2.17, being the Dundas Place Temporary Bicycle Lanes. Looking to committee to see if there's anything further you would like pulled from the consent items. Mr. Mayor.
Chair, and I apologize. In the deferred matters, there's an item relating to 745 Waterloo Street. My wife and daughter own a business there. I'll be declaring a conflict on the deferred matters list.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yeah, if we could pull 2.12, I'd like to ask maybe a question or two on that.
Perfect, thank you. So that's the cycling and transportation demand management upcoming projects has been pulled. Councillor Helmer, did you have one as well?
Yeah, 2.8.
2.8. So that's the automated speed enforcement spring 2021 update has been pulled. Looking to committee to see if there's anything further. Right now it's 2.8, 2.12, 2.13, and 2.17. Councillor Turner.
Madam Chair, just if I might declare a conflict on 2.14, just with respect to the oversight of drinking water quality standards falls within the Middlesex London Health Unit. I'm an employee of the Health Unit. Perfect, thank you kindly. So we'll pull 2.14 so you can vote accordingly and abstain. Okay, looking to committee to see if there's anything further as it was a large agenda. Seeing nothing further, I will put the remainder of the consent items on the floor. Looking to committee for questions or comments, Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. A couple of comments on 2.5 and 2.6. These are both important infrastructure renewal projects. And I wanted to thank everyone who's been working on them to get to the point that they're at. I know residents have been looking forward to the reconstruction, in particular around Swynyard and Muir and Bridges. This is a area that's got a mix of residential and industrial and commercial properties in it, and people have been asking for just the basic infrastructure that you'd see in pretty much every neighborhood down there for a while, and it's going to be great to have that reconstructed. Glad to see that project going ahead. The one on English, that's a major project, quite disruptive for the neighborhood. And already a number of trees have come down as part of that project. And I can tell you, as we have seen, that that was not very popular, and people are frustrated to see those trees coming down. But they know the project is necessary, even if they would have preferred to retain more trees. Some of them were quite large and major trees within the neighborhood. So, hopefully the project and the construction goes really well on English. They're both of those projects, I think, really important ones for renewal. And I wanted to comment on those. The Adelaide Street Underpass, I have a question. So this is 2.1. And I just think it's helpful for the community to get a sense of what they might expect. I know this is just an agreement, but it's another step along the process. So perhaps through the chair, I could ask staff just to give us a sense of what the community should expect to see happening related to this project out there in and around the neighborhood of Adelaide Street over the course of this construction season.
Okay, Mr. McRae.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the councillor's interest in the project. It relates to item with the agreement, and also a mention in the Renew London Infrastructure Construction Program. It is a project with a lot of upfront work, and the work in 2021 will predominantly be a continuation of sort of the upfront utility offsite work that the railway is undertaking to prepare for the new bridge. And the intense capital construction will not start until later this year into the fall. And even at that point, with respect to drainage and replacement of sewers, the initial work for the project will actually start more on Central Avenue, just west of Adelaide. So the impacts on Adelaide Street in 2021 will not be significant, and that'll occur more in the 2022 phase of the project.
Thank you.
Okay. I have the mayor next.
Thanks very much, Chair. I know that I'd like to reference item 2.7, the London Infrastructure Construction Program and review of 2020. I know that infrastructure doesn't always get the attention it deserves, but as you heard Councillor Hahn make reference to what has to be done in terms of renewals on bridges, Swynyard, English, and Lorne, I'd like to give a shout out to staff on this $170 million spend. Here's, and I say this for the benefit of the public as well, but what it really means is the 40 kilometers of roads, the 31 sewers, which represent 14 kilometers of distance, the water mains over 10 kilometers, and in particular the $1.5 million associated with our sewer program relating to the Thames overflow. And I have to tell you, things like infrastructure that we're talking about here are not always seen, but when it's done, it's truly appreciated. So my thanks to staff for their focus on this, and we'll keep it going. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I want to make a comment on 2.3, the public transit stream, the approval of the transfer payment agreement. Happy to see these projects going through, and very happy and grateful for the provincial and federal government's funding commitments to the City of London. I did want to note that the original plan to submit for these funding from the other levels of government included a $130 million investment from London for a total investment of $500 million. So we're investing more and we're getting less, and we're leaving some on the table. So that continues to be disappointing, but I'm really happy to see those projects going forward. I also want to comment on 2.11, the Adelaide Street Underpass project. As the report notes, the original plan to move this project forward had been 2031. And I'm extremely pleased that staff have made this, and City Council has made this, both this current City Council and the previous one, such a high priority, and moved it up substantially in the timeline. This is a major corridor. We talk about just cars that sit there while the trains shunt back and forth. People have to also realize that this is a major route down to Victoria Hospital, not just for emergency vehicles, but also for patients who have to access Victoria Hospital. I know personally myself, when I was going through cancer treatment about 10 years ago, and for part of my treatment, I had to go to Vic on a daily basis and was often stopped in my route because of the train. So this is an extremely important project. It's going to make movement in the city vastly improved once it is complete. And I'm so pleased also to see that CP is contributing to this project. It shows that they recognize that this is an improvement for their operations as well, and great community partnership there. So thanks to staff for the report, and looking forward to the time when this is complete.
Thank you for that. We also have a couple visiting councillors. If they would like to make questions or comments, if they could just virtually raise their hand too, and I'll certainly recognize them. Mr. Mayor, you had your hand raised.
I did so, and Councillor Cassidy reminded me that I intended to make comment and add a shout out as well to our provincial and federal senior levels of government for their commitment. This was a project, as you know, that got majority support from council, and in some cases full support. And we're not giving an opportunity to our efforts in the next phase. That's not lost on any. So I do need to say to our senior government, thank you very much on behalf of the city.
Thank you for those comments. And Mr. Mayor, your internet connection seems slightly unstable as your audio is chopping in and out, just to make you aware. I also want to recognize item 2.12, the Waste Management Working Group, and thank Councillor Van Holst for being willing to serve as chair, and Councillor Turner for stepping up to serve as vice chair. It's appreciated. And I would just ask 2.15, the proposed draft environmental assessment study report for the expansion of the W12A landfill. If Mr. Stanford could just speak briefly to it, recognizing a report's coming back, but then we're going back for public comment. I think it's really important that committee and the public has a very clear understanding of what's happening and that there's another year out that we're still working through things. Could you just speak briefly to that, Mr. Stanford?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to highlight the very comprehensive report before you, as well as a number of technical documents. This is all part of the very large environmental assessment process. And yes, we have been at it now for 4 years. And that actually is a good time frame, to be quite honest, because of how elaborate this process is. It requires significant community engagement. And during that period, we have been out not only with our neighbors around the landfill site, with many within a couple kilometers of the landfill site, and we've heard from many different Londoners. The report before you basically captures the draft environmental assessment study report, and it captures about 15 plus technical documents that all support going up. And that is basically expanding the landfill site, keeping the footprint the same, but adding about 26 meters, or the height of a 9-story building, to the height of the landfill site to gain its additional 9.9 million tons of capacity over the next 25 years. The report highlights that this report before you, then ultimately council, is just one step in the whole approval process. This will go out again to the community after going through council. It will also go to our government review team, and that includes about 15 to 17 different agencies, as well as the Indigenous communities nearby that have been participating. So it is another opportunity for further comment to make sure that we are delivering what we say we're delivering in the form of commitments, which we have provided in the report. We're living up to the expectations of the environmental assessment and doing our best to meet the needs of the community at this stage. We believe we have achieved all that, and our report before you today is just an important step in the process of going out to the community again, where we anticipate over the next 9 to 10 months, we will receive our final accomplishment of receiving our environmental assessment. But until we get to that point in time, we have to follow the process before you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for that, as I think it helps to keep us aware of where we're at, recognizing we are on timelines ourselves. If anyone else on committee had questions, I'll certainly take those now. If not, I'm looking for a mover and a seconder of the consent items that have not been pulled. Mr. Mayor, and then Councillor Cassidy as a seconder. That vote will come up momentarily in eScribe. I'll also make committee aware that we do have things for the that have been added to our committee agenda, so just make sure that you're following around in the right agenda for we're all on the same page.
Mayor Holder.
Yes, thank you. We're connecting the eScribe. It's a little challenging from this office. I will vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. I'll be looking for automated speed enforcement spring 2021 update. Councillor Helmer, I'll go to you first if you'd like to make comment as you had pulled this item.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, I guess my question to city staff is, what's the downside of just going ahead now? You know, we put this off for a year last year to give the province some time to look at it, and here we are a year later, and the idea is just to put it off again. And you know, I think if we were to go ahead now, I don't think we'd be in a situation where we need to change equipment or anything like substantial. If we implement it now, we can get through the warning period and then actually be able to start issuing tickets. And if they allow the use of AMPs in the future, that certainly would make things administratively much more efficient. But not having the ability to use AMPs right now doesn't seem like a good enough reason to not have automated speed enforcement at all, which is the situation we're in right now. And you know, this is an intervention that we know will reduce speeds on the streets. The halo effect around automated speed enforcement is quite good, and just having a few of these units out there on the road can really help in terms of road safety. So I'm quite keen to see this actually rolled out. I don't really like the idea of waiting. And so I guess my question through the chair to staff is, like, really, what are we risking by going ahead now? Because I don't really see the downside.
Thank you. Mr. McCray, if you want to talk about any financial risk or program effectiveness or other things that you think would be pertinent, please go so.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly appreciate Councillor Helmer's comments. We're enthusiastic about the program as well. Just the most significant risk, though, at the current time relates to the issuance of warning notices. And it's currently worded as a recommendation, and it's somewhat vague, but it relates to whenever an ASE unit, an automated speed enforcement unit, is deployed. And the program that we have in mind for London involves the redeployment of cameras to different locations. So if a very one interpretation of that requirement, and it's currently a recommendation, but there's potential for it to be changed as part of the province's review, is that requirement could apply anytime a camera is redeployed, and our redeployment period was envisioned to be 30 days. So a 90-day warning notice period is essentially would that would turn the business case on its head. It would 90-day worth of warning. If we stuck with the 30-day circulation time, it would essentially be pushing us into a no infraction notice type of scenario. So it's a significant piece there. It's a risk item that that really justifies the recommendation that staff is putting forward to just continue to hold until the results of the provincial review are known.
Councillor Helmer.
Okay, so again, that seems like a good rationale to set them up in fixed locations for the time being until we can more easily move them around. So I would, I think we should still go ahead. Having automated speed enforcement at no locations is a lot worse than having it at a few locations. And we need to buy the equipment, get it out on the road. Once we can move them around easily, I think that's going to make it a lot easier. Once we can use the administrative monetary penalties, I think administratively that's going to simplify things for residents. But just not having it at all, I don't think is a good idea. So I think the direction that we should head in is just move ahead with implementing automated speed enforcement with the rules the way they are. And if the province makes some adjustments, we can adapt. So I guess the recommendation from staff is to put it off until the province finishes their review. What I'd like to move is that we proceed with implementation now.
Councillor Helmer, just for clarification, are you moving that motion now or after other colleagues have spoken?
I'm happy to hear from other people. That's the motion I'd like to move, yeah.
Okay, so the clerks are working on putting that into writing and then into eScribe. And on the speakers list, I then have to the motion that's going to be conversation. Okay, so Councillor Helmer would move that. We would need a seconder to go through. Okay, so Councillor Turner is the seconder, and on the speakers list, sorry, I have Councillor Cassidy, Councillor Turner, and then the mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I agree with Councillor Helmer. I have a question to staff. In the purchase of equipment that would be required, is there a risk that costs will escalate the longer we put off the purchase?
Mr. McRae?
The term of the contract is it's a multi-year contract, and a deferral of an additional year would likely have just a minor impact on the cost of entering the multi-year contract. A deferral any longer than that, and we're certainly hopeful that would not be the case, then it starts to incur more costs on an annual basis. But at that time, no, we don't feel those costs are significant.
Okay, so thank you. My comments are, you know, speeding in neighborhoods, especially in Ward 5, has always been a big thing. You know, with not speaking about temporary issues that come up and generate a lot of discussion and a lot of input from the community, speeding in neighborhoods is the #1 thing that comes up from my constituents to me. I also sit on the Police Service Board along with Councillor Helmer and the Mayor, and we just had a report at our last meeting on the racing and speeding that's going on in our city throughout the pandemic. It's interesting that some of the data has been so choppy coming from the cities that are involved in this pilot project, because and it may just happen to be the location of where they have their automated speed enforcement equipment set up. But I know in London, the issue of speeding, despite the pandemic, despite there being fewer cars on the road, has only gotten worse. And as Councillor Helmer said, if we choose to have fixed locations for a short period of time versus no locations, we're never going to start tackling this problem. And we don't have enough officers on the road. And is that the best use of time for officers to be spending there looking for speeders to catch them? If we can have an automated option to free up officers to respond and do that proactive policing that they are talking about doing more of, thank goodness, to respond to crimes as they're happening and try to prevent crimes before they happen, then I think that that's a positive thing. And I will support this motion that's on the floor.
Okay, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I do agree with Councillor Helmer's motion here. I think it's really important. I'm not seeing a lot in here that keeps us from being able to move forward. In fact, in the report itself, it says the guidelines from the Ministry of Transportation recommended that warning notices be issued in lieu of infraction notices for the first 90 days. So it recommends, and wherever an ASE unit is deployed. Thus far, the issuance of warning notices by participating municipalities has been quite limited and less than the MTO recommendation. And reading through OREG 39819, there's nothing in here that speaks to even anything about warning notices. So the application of the legislation on automated speed enforcement has no such requirement at all. In fact, it sounds like there wouldn't even be a need to, even on a shorter term, issue any notices. Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. McRae, is that correct?
Mr. McRae?
That is correct. Currently, the regulation does not require that. It is a recommendation from the Ministry of Transportation, and it's part of the review. So it's a risk factor, but the councillor is correct in that currently the issuances of warning notices not required, and to this point, the half a dozen municipalities that have implemented automated speed enforcement are largely not issuing warning notices.
Okay, that's for you, Madam Chair. Thank you. That's very helpful. The only conditions that seem to be in place in the Act are specifically as to where those can be deployed and what needs to be erected around it, and that's the signage. But I don't see much else in terms of restrictions or things that would impede us from being able to deploy this immediately once we were able to get a contract in place. Are there other things that we're missing in this?
Mr. McRae?
No, you're correct in that the signage was another item that was not previously envisioned when the program was created, but that is manageable with some impact on costs, which likely is absorbable. And then the other thing we've learned, as mentioned in the report, is just the need predominantly for reporting to the ministry, and the requirement that that's the equivalent of another full-time resource on the administration side. And so that's something that we would need to consider if we went forward with automated speed enforcement at this time.
Sorry, go ahead, Madam Chair.
No, I was going to ask you for a follow-up, and then I would recognize Mayor Holder and then Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, so thanks, Madam Chair. Those answer my questions. With all of that, I'm not seeing any reason to not proceed. I think it's quite appropriate. I think we would want to proceed with no or as little notice as possible in terms of infraction notices. I don't see that as anything that's really constructive. I think we can serve that by means of a public campaign of saying we now have automated speed enforcement in London. Beware, be ready, and we don't have to warn those who are doing the infractions when they do the infractions. We can do that citywide in advance, and I think that serves the purpose that the government was trying to achieve in terms of those infraction notices. And so supportive of the motion. Be interested to hear my colleagues' comments as well, but I hope this is able to proceed as soon as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thanks, Chair. With regard to staff's recommendation around automated speed enforcement, I've got a three-part question, if I could, for you, Mr. McRae, if I could, please. The first is, what would waiting 1 year give us, be it information or things that the province might, when they make reference to complications? I wonder if you might elaborate on that. The second, is it a better plan if we wait? I'm not sure what that means, and maybe you could give us your thoughts if there are, if there's anything better that comes from waiting. And finally, is any provincial funding associated with this such that waiting a year would give us extra supports from the province? Those would be my three questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. McRae?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Waiting 1 year just provides certainty with respect to the two items mentioned in the report and what has been discussed related to signage and the warning issuance of warning notice, and then any other change that the ministry could impose on the program. So it's just a reduced risk with respect to any potential changes. Regarding a better plan, I assume the question relates to an alternative to automated speed enforcement. No, there's
or technology, sir.
Technology. Nothing that we're aware of at the current time. This program was developed by a number of municipalities in the province and included ourselves, and from a school zone safety perspective and reducing speeds in school zones. We obviously have traffic calming, and we're trying to focus that program on school zones. But the automated, like on the enforcement side, there's no other significant programs that would replace automated speed enforcement from the enforcement perspective. With respect to potential provincial funding, I'm not aware of any potential programs. They tend to be more capital funding related, and this program is primarily operational.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for those. Just one final follow-up. Are these deemed to be fixed locations, or is there flexibility that we can move these units to areas as need be? And how complicated would that be if it has any flexibility?
Mr. McRae.
The locations would need to be bylawed, but the intent with the program that we devised for London would be rotating the cameras around to a number of school zones, so across the city. It does require a bit of lead time in that moving the infrastructure, and with the requirement for the signage to be placed in advance, it does take some planning and notification to the community that way associated with the bylaw. But yes, it is intended with the planning part of the program to rotate the cameras to provide a benefit citywide with a limited number of cameras, and also recognizing the limited resources in the provincial offenses administration, the POA process in the courts, and recognizing the capacity that they have to process the infractions.
So Chair, appreciating that point, Mr. McRae. Councillor Cassidy made reference to Councillor Helmer. She and I sitting in on the London Police Services Board, and one of the challenges we also have is related to high-speed car racing and the like. And is it your intent to work with the police beyond school zones, which are obvious locations, but would the intent be to work with the police for any of these higher activity areas where there are challenges and problems?
Mr. McRae.
Yes, certainly. We currently collaborate with the London Police Service with their traffic unit on road safety issues around the city, and this program would certainly be a complement and help them to combine, create efficiencies with their resources, and also allow them to allocate resources to other areas where the automated speed enforcement would be picking up the slack for certain school zones.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate all that background.
Thank you. I recognize Councillor Lewis and then Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for recognizing me at the committee. And thank you, Councillor Helmer, for putting this motion on the floor. I agree with you 100% on this. I would much rather see a few sort of semi-fixed locations, recognizing the challenges of moving these around in the short term, and as the flexibility develops from the province, we can move forward from there. But it's certainly, I agree with Councillor Cassidy, it's probably the #1 complaint that I get from my residents. When the report was made public last week, in fact, that very morning, I had 3 emails from 3 different constituents on 3 different streets, 2 of them in school zones, raising this very concern. So I would very much be in favor of this. I think it does have the added benefit of freeing up the police resources so that they can be redeployed in other areas to deal with traffic management issues that need to be developed. And I agree with Councillor Turner. I think a public information campaign citywide is a much better option than warning notices going out for infractions. You know, it's very, very simple. And I've said this in the media, and colleagues probably would have heard it, but I want to say this again. If you don't want a speeding ticket, don't speed. And then the automated speed enforcement will not be a challenge for you. But I frankly don't want to wait. I was really frustrated with the recommendation to wait, and that's not reflective on our staff. That's reflective on the province, you know, making tweaks and you know, to be as diplomatic as possible, mucking around with what they had presented earlier. And so I will definitely support this at council. I hope that colleagues support it at committee today, and that we can get this moving as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis, for your learned advice to drivers just not to speed, and they'll avoid a lot of problems. Councillor Van Holst, welcome to committee, and please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you to staff, could I just get a description of how these units would differ from the ones that we already have in place at some of the major intersections?
Mr. McCrae?
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, the red light cameras are a different form of automated enforcement. They detect vehicles through sensors in the pavement to determine when a vehicle goes through an intersection through a red light. So similarly, these cameras would be placed in a box in the boulevard beside the street, and would be snapping photos of license plates and coordinate that with the radar detection, determine the speed of the vehicle. And so the infraction notice would be similar in that it's an infraction against the owner of the vehicle, and no demerit points apply to the driver, since it's associated with the identification of the license plate.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, if I may. One of the issues with the red light cameras was that they were very costly, or the program to administer them was very, very costly. How does this program compare? And I guess my question is, how might the tweaks that the province is considering impact the return on that program?
Mr. McCrae?
Yeah, through the chair, the red light camera program is essentially paying for itself. And our goal with these programs are to improve road safety. That's the number one goal, and they've been effective at that. The economics, although it's important, but it's somewhat secondary, but related to the question, red light cameras through the infractions have been paying the cost of the program and actually creating a minor surplus. And so that surplus is saved in an account, and the business case that was previously presented for automated speed enforcement. So this program predicted a similar scenario whereby the program could likely pay for itself, and there was some initial upfront costs where the program would run a slight deficit in the very early part of the program, and that would be funded using the surplus that was created through the red light camera program.
A follow-up,
Okay.
and then after Councillor Van Holst, I have Councillor Van Merbergen.
Thank you. Yes, and the other issue I wanted to bring up was the coming soon signs. So that was interesting to me. What do we think there will be an effect on drivers simply by virtue of the a automated enforcement coming soon sign placed somewhere? If so, I think maybe we should experiment with those.
Mr. McCrae?
Yeah, the automated speed enforcement coming soon signs were a requirement of the program implemented by the province. The initial results from a few municipalities that have implemented the program is that the concerns initially that might change the dynamics of the program or not, in that the signs, once removed from the given location, that speeds tended to have that halo effect, and that they continued to be lower even after the warning signs were removed.
Okay, Councillor Van Holst, I'll allow you a follow-up question if you have one, and then I need to proceed to Councillor Van Merbergen.
Yes, just comment, Madam Chair, that seems to be an encouraging thing. If there's a halo effect, I think what happens is people realize that they need to slow down, and they get in the habit of slowing down in those areas, and then keep that habit. And so that might be worth putting those in at the very least.
Thank you, Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to continue on with regard to cost. I think Councillor Van Holst touched on this. Maybe I could ask, just by starting, what does each one of these cameras cost?
Mr. McCray?
I don't have the individual costs of the cameras available at the current time. We do have previous approval to enter the contract with the service provider, which is Red Flex Traffic Systems, and it's an all-encompassing service that includes the cost of the cameras, relocations, and administering of the program on their end, and it's all included in that service contract.
Okay, so how many cameras are included in the service contract, and what is the amount of the service contract?
It was initially envisioned to have between 2 and 5 cameras implemented in London, starting with 2 and then ramping up to 5.
And so what would the cost be on that?
As I mentioned, the business case was essentially cost neutral. I'll need to do a bit of digging to get the rollout cost of the service provider contract. That's why I don't have that in front of me at the current time.
As I recall in the past, is it fair to say, like roughly speaking, each camera is worth, correct me if I'm wrong, is it a few $100,000? Is it less than that, more than that?
Mr. McCray, if you would ballpark something, if able.
Yeah, as I mentioned previously, it's part of the service contract with Red Flex, and so I'm not able to speculate, but it is a technology, comes in an enclosed a substantial box. It includes the radar detection and the camera system, and I just received some information here from a team member. The 5-year cost of the program is $1 million. So that includes the cost of the cameras and relocation and mobilization of them. The cameras are at least part of that contract.
So I think, as I recall, there's, in terms of school zones, there's about 300, perhaps over 300 areas where these cameras can be installed across London. So we'd be looking at maybe, looks like the upper end is 5 out of that 300 for $1 million. And I also recall that, wasn't there a processing fee that the government or some agency in Toronto would charge for each ticket? It was something like $75 or $80 per ticket. Is that still the case, or is that all covered in that service contract?
Mr. McCray?
Yeah, the infraction notice includes the fine, and then there's an administration fee, but it's much lower charge than that. It was in the order of $10 to $20, if I remember correctly. So it's a lower cost.
Yeah, it just strikes me that I mean, of course, we all want to control speeds, but this sounds good. It's technology and all the rest, but just to do 5 areas for $1 million when we have over 300 to cover. It doesn't seem the most efficient way. I still maintain that just going with properly placed, well-engineered speed humps can be just as effective, if not more so, at a fraction of the cost, and we'd have more coverage and sooner. So that is my concern to the downside of this type of approach. Thank you.
Thank you. As Mr. McCray said, the business case was approved, and Councillor Helmer's motion before us is to not defer the implementation of this project. I have no further questions or hands raised from anyone that I could see. We do have a mover and a seconder. Seeing nothing further, the vote will be opening in eScribe. I'll just ask the clerk to read out the wording of it for those who have joined us virtually today as we vote.
That the Civic Administration be directed to proceed with the implementation of the automated speed enforcement program, it being noted that the staff report dated March 30th, 2021 with respect to this matter was received. Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Proceed on to item 2.12, being the cycling and transportation demand management upcoming projects. Councillor Van Merbergen, you had requested this one be pulled, and we do have staff available to answer our questions as we proceed down this.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify these e-scooters and the e-bikes and the e-cargo. I want to clarify, is there an impact to taxpayers on this, or are we contracting this out to providers that would bypass direct tax contributions on this? What is the model here?
Mr. Stanford, I'll let you answer the councillor's question or anything else at this time if you feel be pertinent to help with this discussion.
Thank you, and through the chair. And let me just explain, there's a couple steps that are occurring here. We are getting ready to go out for a request for proposals, and e-scooters and the number that should be in the RFP is what is before you today. We still have to actually come forward with a whole process and an outcome of whether a bylaw should allow e-scooters in London. So that is going to be subject of a separate process. The results of anything going forward, such as the request for proposal, will of course come back to committee and council, and it is at that point in time there will be a determination of the cost structure of any new program. So at this point, we have not earmarked any taxpayer dollars towards these projects. We have indicated that through federal gas tax funding, that if there was to be any bike share stations put in place, that the committee and council may wish to consider up to $750,000. That still hasn't been finalized as a decision. It has been an amount that has been used in the past as what may be appropriate, subject to any types of bids coming forward from the private sector.
Okay, I'll also make note to committee that this motion is in an ABC format. If it helps when it's time to vote, that might be advantageous. Councillor Van Merbergen, if you had a follow-up question at this point, please go ahead. If not, I'll recognize the mayor and can come back to you if you could think of something later.
I just wanted a quick follow-up. So the thinking right now is the cost impacts are coming to us at another time. Is that a fair comment?
Mr. Stanford?
Through the chair, exactly. There are no cost implications right now of going out with the request for proposal. All that information will come forward as part of a further report for any final decision on the role of e-scooters under a sharing program in London, bike share under a separate program in London, or potentially the combination of both of them being delivered by a private sector service provider.
And at that time, it could very well be that that private sector service provider would absorb the costs with some type of model through rentals, et cetera. Is that correct?
If I may, through the chair, that is actually our ultimate goal. It would be ideal if this could be fully absorbed through the rental prices. Part of our uncertainty right now is that with all the changes that have occurred in the marketplace, it's just something that we're not sure on. We do know that other systems out there have required some taxpayer support. So that is why at this point, I cannot rule out as that being something that, of course, that Civic Works and Council would have to consider, but that will be, to repeat, subject of a separate report when we get to that stage in the process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm comfortable proceeding with the recommendation so far as we're receiving the report. We've established a limit here for the pilot project and preparing a plan. I don't have any issue with any of that because at this point it's fact finding beyond the report, which I thought was quite thorough. If I have concerns, broader terms, it has everything to do with sidewalk and road safety. And as I consider that, I think any of us that have walked or driven a car and seen these e-scooters, which frankly are motorcycles by any other name, I see sometimes people that don't wear helmets. I think we have issues. I don't think we have issues around age restrictions. I think we'll deal with that. But certainly issues around helmets for everyone who would have it would be a minimum, I would think. And how they would use bike lanes. I mean, one of the considerations for bike lanes now is we have some cyclists who can travel pretty quickly, and we might sometimes wonder how well some cyclists stop at stop signs and or and lights. By and large, cyclists get it, and it's the few that can be a challenge. I think that gets potentially amplified when you have motorized bicycles. So we can call them e-scooters, but they're bicycles with a motor on them, and I will call that a motorcycle ultimately. That's, as someone who drives a motorcycle badly, I would tell you that I have some concerns around e-scooters just in general. So there's another couple of parts to this, and that is the bike corrals, which I think matter because I think that when I've read up on this and we see some of the messes associated with scooters just not locked up, I think that creates its own problems. So understanding how other cities do that in more detail, I would think this review to go to the potential next step is worthy. Whether I'm prepared to support ultimately that we have e-scooters, I think some questions have to be answered. But I'm particularly concerned around the focus of individuals, kids, and their families in terms of sidewalk and road safety. So those are my caveats, but I won't impede the next step to continue the review and set some of the work in motion. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Councillor Turner as my last speaker on the list at the moment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to address the Mayor's comments, if you were to look at item 2.8, it has an image of what the scooter is. It's not not similar to a bicycle. It's a small platform close to the ground that somebody stands on, rather than there's the electric bikes, the kind of those other things that you see all around town right now. You don't really see too many e-scooters at this point. You see the large electric, almost like a moped kind of thing. And that's not what we're talking about in this pilot. When this came forward last, I had some reservations about it. I still do, but fair enough. Let's move forward with this because it was supported at the time. I think the challenge ends up being how that integrates with other road and sidewalk users and where the appropriate place for these to be is, because it's a different speed than whether it's in a bike lane, whether it's on a multi-use pathway, whether it's on a sidewalk. Otherwise, this is not a consistent speed that these things move. And where I've been in other cities where these rental programs have been, they've concerned me a little bit as I've seen them, but maybe that's just me being a little old and codgy at times. But if I might, I do have a question with respect to the pilot for the bike, get the right word, the bike lockers. We identify having a pilot for 9 lockers. What are we looking to determine at the end of a pilot versus why wouldn't we just move ahead with this? It seems to be a no-brainer. Bicycle theft is very high. And it's certainly for me, when I bike to work downtown, I'm fortunate to have a secured bike parking facility, but if I'm moving to another location with my bike, I'm really reluctant to lock it up outside of eyesight. So if I'm at a cafe or something like that, I'm usually making sure that I'm sitting at a window and watching it the whole time, because I'm not very confident that any lock has much ability to defeat bike theft right now. And these bike lockers are a pretty significant measure in helping to address bike theft. So why pilot? Why don't we just go full out on this?
Thank you to staff. I don't know if it would be helpful to say where the city is at currently with bike lockers and then how it relates specifically to what's within the report before us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The bike locker pilot project is being designed to test a couple things. And that's the reason why we're using the word pilot, is location-wise, where we will be picking 3 locations. And we've used some reasonable analysis, but inevitably we may get 1 or 2 locations incorrect after 3 months. Therefore, the bike lockers may move to a better location. We also are shortly going to be having a report on the fees and charges bylaw changes. And there we are not completely sure on the right pricing structure until we get our feet wet in all of this. And finally, the whole notion of locking up bicycles, we hear loud and clear that that is something that's desired by the community. We just don't know whether bike lockers meets that need for further investment, or whether in fact it is just a stepping stone for more permanent like facilities where you truly are bringing it indoors past an attendant. So for that reason, we are, as staff here, we've been pushing forward with the idea that we're doing a test in the community, and we need their feedback immediately as we go through to develop this program. That is the reason why we're considering it a pilot project as part of our long-term bike parking needs.
Councillor Turner, a follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stanford. Through you, Madam Chair. As follow-up, what's the period of time for the pilot? At what point do you make a determination of whether to expand the program into full usage? And what are the metrics that you're looking at specifically that will indicate success?
To staff.
Through the chair, 2 key metrics will be usage. Basically, how often are these being booked? How often we're looking at a combination of monthly rental and basically rent as you go. It'll be along the lines of 2 hours are free and then a payment for the next couple hours. So that is all going to be tracked as part of the pilot. And when I talk about usage, it'll be if these are underutilized, our goal after about a 3-month period would be to move them to the next preferred area. As far as reporting back, we would like to be looking at a 6-month period and a 1-year period, because we would like to go through next winter. And one of our locations is more on the in covered parking. So we find that we're likely to find that is a much more enjoyable experience in winter months. And we do know that cycling behavior in the winter does change. So you almost need a full year to go on this. These particular units coming in, the bundles coming in at about $80,000. So this is not necessarily the potentially the cheapest solution, but we believe it's an important stepping stone. And before we make further decision on where more bike lockers should go, there are those that are actually moving to those type of permanent structures. And we want to be looking at that at the same time as part of the pilot project.
Okay, Councillor Turner, if you have a follow-up, please go ahead. And after that, I'll recognize Councillor Helmer and the mayor.
Thank you. No, that completes my questions.
Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. My question through the chair is just about how we're going to involve the advisory committees, in particular the accessibility advisory committee. I've seen some of these scooters in action and they move relatively quickly and they're pretty quiet. And I know that that poses some challenges for folks who may not see the vehicles coming or hear them. So I wonder if we just have a sense of how the consultation will go with the advisory committees about the details, because I support going ahead with the RFP, but I do think there's some details that need to be worked out and we need to get some advice on that front.
Perfect. Thank you to staff.
Through the chair, we will be working with about 3 or 4 of the advisory committees on this project. We will also actually seek input from the community as well. But no, tapping into our advisory committees who are specialists in a number of these areas is going to be very important. We've also received initial comments from London Police Services, and we have previous comments as well from the Middlesex Health Unit that all indicate a wide audience must be looked at when we're considering any role of e-scooters into the future.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for those comments and questions, Councillor Helmer. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much. Councillor Turner is quite correct that that these scooters are different than e-bikes, but I'll turn your attention to page 261, where we do talk about e-bikes in this, but we call them cargo e-bikes. And that's part of this study as well. And my issue, whether it's relating to the scooters or to the cargo e-bikes, still comes to the issues around sidewalk and road safety as it relates to our citizens, our kids. And I'm glad to hear Mr. Stanford talk about the corrals, the lockups, and the like. But I have 2 questions. One is the liability component, sponsored by us. Somebody hits somebody or damages property. Where does our liability lay? And then secondly, as it relates to e-cargo bikes, electric bikes, can I ask Mr. Stanford to comment about that? How far this takes it in terms of this recommendation, please?
To staff.
Through the chair, both items are very important of our upcoming analysis. We'll be working with our legal services and our risk management folks to make sure we fully understand how this is, could be implemented here in London. Fortunately, we do have a good track record of implementation in other communities that we'll be able to rely on. For the most part, it is essentially the liability sits with the operator of the program. And in most cases in North America, the operators are very responsible agencies that have programs in place that meet the needs of the municipality and have the proper liability in place should there ever be an accident. So that will be part of the discussion. It will also be part and clearly laid out in the request for proposal that will be a requirement of any operator to be able to demonstrate that they have the appropriate levels of liability that are viewed appropriate by our legal and risk management groups.
And reference to the, before I ask you about the cargo e-bikes and where that takes us, I come from 30 years of insurance background, and I got to tell you, we don't get rid of our liability. Regardless of how much coverage the other person has, the sue everybody in sight approach is not uncommon, and so I'll be very interested in your review of what our liability potential is, because I don't think it's if we'll ever have an accident. I think it's when and how we respond, and so I'll look to that with great interest. So I appreciate that that's a big focus for you, Mr. Stanford, and for all of us. I wonder if you'd respond to the cargo e-bikes, where this review would take us as well, and any information relating to quantities you're thinking about, licensing, if it's intended to be for commercial use, how that would work. Could you just give us some sense, or was this intended to be for pleasure only, the cargo e-bikes.
To staff?
Through the chair, a very brief bit of background. This announcement came from the provincial government less than a month ago. We've received very little information, and in fact, it entered our report at the 11th hour just because we were doing this broad overview and felt that this would be the time to be looking at this for a bunch of important reasons. We've done very little research in the way of understanding what the intent of the provincial government in this regard, other than the provincial government has clearly stated it is a pilot project and a local government must pass a municipal bylaw to allow these. So if I can, through the chair, Mr. Mayor, we still have a lot of work to do on this particular file. I don't have many answers for you at this point in time.
All right, well, we'll look forward to that. Thank you very much, Mr. Stanford. I appreciate your candid responses.
Okay, thank you. I will need a mover and a seconder for this item, but I will recognize Councillor Cassidy first. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to move it. I'm happy to see this coming forward, and I think it's great that the provincial government is starting this from a regulatory viewpoint, and if municipalities are interested in allowing these, especially cargo e-bikes, to operate, then let's get the regulations in place first, because I think that was missed years ago when e-bikes started entering our municipalities, and there have been conflicts with e-bikes, and there weren't regulations put in place. And so I know I've received complaints from constituents about e-bikes on sidewalks and bicycle paths, and they come up very quietly, and they move at a quicker speed than most people can pedal their own bicycles. So I'm happy with this approach. I'm glad that staff added this in, even if it was at the 11th hour. I also see, some great opportunities for helping, especially downtown, dealing with congestion, dealing with parking, to have this option for short trip deliveries of goods and food or whatever. I think it's a great option, especially because it would lower smog and pollution and emissions in general, but also they're traveling at a much more slower speed than automobiles. So if we had more of these kinds of delivery vehicles as opposed to traditional gas-powered vehicles, I would anticipate that safety, especially with the proper regulations in place, that safety would be increased rather than decreased. So happy to support moving forward with this RFP and getting more information as we go along. Thanks.
Thank you. So I have a mover and Councillor Cassidy, and Councillor Helmer, is that your digital hand up as a seconder?
Sure.
Perfect. Did you have a question too, or just?
Nope.
Are you good? Perfect. Okay, so we have Councillor Helmer as the seconder, and that will be opening in eScribe for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. We're moving on to item 2.13, being the Green Bin Program Design Community Engagement Feedback. I'll ask Mr. Stanford to give an overview of what's before us, as it was a lengthy report, also recognizing that the recommendations are broken down in through A through F, and then I'll go to Councillor Van Merbergen to see how he would prefer it to be separated. Mr. Stanford, could you please proceed with what's before us and next steps?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and you are quite correct. There's a fair bit of community work that has gone into this report, and we've just helped the community package it up. We went out for about an 8-week period where we saw what I believe is a very good community engagement. We heard from over 3,500 people about the Green Bin program and their desires from an implementation perspective. What would go in the green bin, the size of the green bin, Should liners be used? What about certain items that should go in? And as well, what would be the concerns as we move forward with garbage going to every 2 weeks? So the report itself, we tried to package it up into very tight sections that deal with each of the 5 questions that were posed to the community. We also, at the same time, refreshed our technical work where we looked at other Ontario municipalities that have been involved in these kinds of programs. We also went back, as our report notes, to the Pallet project that was operated in London about almost 10 years ago now, where we did learn a number of things about the program. And then, of course, our own staff experience. We pulled all that together to help develop the recommendations for this particular report. And we put them forward where if there was not 100% clarity on a direction that we should go, we designed it where we could actually at the marketplace price out 2 separate options to help us in final decision making. And that example would be, should pet waste be included in the mix of green bin materials? Pet waste being added to your traditional food scraps as part of the collection program. We also provide information in the report on what would happen with choice of liners that go either with your inside kitchen catcher, inside the kitchen, or the curbside container. And that information is provided here, knowing that there are some options that are without cost, and that there are some solutions, though, that are available in the marketplace in other municipalities where homeowners do purchase a compostable bag liner, for example, as part of the composting system. We also, at the end, looked at the notion of going to bi-weekly garbage collection. That is part of the proposal to date with the with committee and council as we move forward based on our learnings with other communities. But there are considerations such as what happens with extra garbage? What happens if diapers are causing a concern? These are items that other communities have dealt with in the past. And part of our recommendations is that we need to dive a little bit deeper with those communities to identify the solutions that would work well here in London. We have additional time to do some of these items because while we go out for our request for proposals, there's a period of time that we can do further analysis, and that is part of what we're going to do. So the recommendations that you have before you today, Madam Chair, are very much tied to the 5 questions that were asked of the community to comment on, and provide that flexibility. Should there be any changes, we will also hear from the marketplace on some of their comments on how to produce the best cost solution for the City of London that does maximize waste diversion.
Perfect. Thank you for that detailed update, as this was a larger item coming before us with lots of community engagement feedback that we appreciate. Councillor Van Meerbergen, recognizing there's parts A through F, how would you prefer it to be separated?
Madam Chair, if you could just pull A, and then I'll just vote on the rest of it as a group.
Okay, thank you. Looking to committee for a mover and a seconder, and then questions and comments. Okay, the mayor will move.
Yeah, I'll stop. Yeah,
Sorry.
Chair, I'll second. It's only fair that the councillor has his perspective as well.
Yeah, and then we're reporting here in chambers that the mayor was audio was broken up and we couldn't hear if you were moving or seconding or.
No, I think it's already been suggested that we split. Is that not the question? I didn't think.
Yes, A comes out and B through F remains per the councillor's request.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
I'll move if you're looking for that, Chair.
Thank you. And a seconder? Okay, I'll second. And then the speakers list, I have Councillor Van Meerbergen first, and then others can please raise their hand digitally if they're able.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard a few times now about where this program ranks in, if you want to call it the hierarchy of how we're moving ahead on waste diversion and handling our solid waste. And it's been explained that this is very much a transitional program. This is getting us from point A to point B. But as a transitional program, it's an extremely expensive exercise. And the transition is going between our status quo currently to going to a mixed waste processing system. And so, again, going through this transition, $5 million a year operating, looks like between, as I recall, 13 to 15 million for capital expenses. This is a huge expense onto the taxpayers, and really for the benefit of just going for a few years with this composting scenario as we move towards mixed waste processing. And it seems like the mixed waste processing is actually coming upon us quite rapidly. The technology is developing every year. It's getting closer and closer. So for these reasons, as I've expressed before, it seems like a very costly program to get us really just a few years before we end up changing to the mixed waste processing system. So those are my thoughts on this, and interested to hear others' comments.
Okay, and that's a wonderful question of, is there other comments at this point? I see no hands raised currently from committee members nor visiting counselors, so I'll give you a moment to think if you want anything asked. If not, it has been moved and seconded. Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Cassidy, and right now it's just Part A will be voted on first, and then we'll do a mover and a seconder through B through F, as we did need to separate it out.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify what the motion was that was on the floor. So
yeah, so right now it's A, that this report be received for information.
And then we'll be voting
yes.
on the rest of the motion. Okay, so but the whole motion is before us. So I'll just comment. I'm happy to see this moving forward. As staff has repeatedly told us, we have run out of time. We're no longer running out of time at our landfill site. We have run out of time. We have participated in an EA process with the ministry. We do require a certain amount of diversion, which is waste diversion from landfill, which is much greater than what we are doing right now. And the way for us to achieve those targets and get where we need to be is through the green bin program or separating out the organic waste. That is how we're going to get to the target we need to get to. And if we don't get to that target, we will not get permission to expand the landfill the way we need to. So this is a responsible thing to do. It is also something that I hear from constituents all the time, wondering why London doesn't have a green bin program. We're probably the only municipality of our size that doesn't have one. I did want to comment on a couple of the concerns that were raised in the public engagement process, one being the biweekly garbage pickup is a concern. I can tell you that I compost regularly all of my food scraps, and it has cut down on my regular garbage so much that even with our 8-day cycle, I do not have to put out regular garbage on every single garbage day. I will often skip a week here and there. I usually skip a week or two throughout the month. So it really does cut down on that regular garbage cycle. So, and obviously there has been a lot of engagement. There has been a lot of participation. I think people are unaware when the feedback about the size of bin that they would like to see. I don't know if staff had examples when of the actual containers what a large bin would look like compared to a medium or a small. But anyway, I'm glad to see all the feedback. I'm glad to see the engagement that's taken place, and I'm happy to support the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst, comments on A for the report?
Yes, I'm thanking staff for the report and for doing the public engagement. And also wanted to ask, because it was brought up, I think another report is coming to us regarding mixed waste. And can I ask through you, Madam Chair, if that's the case and when that might be coming?
To staff?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair, we will have an update report on mixed waste processing for the April 20th Civic Works Committee. It is nearing completion, and it's just going to update the status of the industry as we know it right now, and provide also updates on where the region of Durham and the region of Peel are with their pilot project processes that are in place for mixed waste processing, and approximate timelines that people are experiencing with getting technology to the marketplace through the approval process and then up to an operational point in time.
Councillor, a follow-up question, and then I'll recognize Councillor Turner.
I have no follow-up, Madam Chair.
Perfect. Councillor Turner, did you still have your hand up?
I took it down. My comments are with respect to BCD.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for holding those. As this has been moved and seconded, the vote will now be opening in eScribe, and then we'll proceed with B through F. So this is just for A, that the report be received for information.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. For B through F, moved by Councillor Turner. I'll second it. And on my speakers list to start, I'll recognize Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just really quickly, we had a good discussion about this at the Waste Management Working Group last week, and it seems to be an appropriate direction. I'd be interested to hear what the results end up being from the RFPs on Mix 1, Mix 2, and what's viable and what are the best options at the end of the day. The container size is interesting because I think there's a general tendency to always want the largest container, but I don't think most people recognize how little by volume the organic waste takes up. It's about 1/3, I think, by weight of all household waste. But it's really the wet stuff, and so it takes up a lot of weight, but not necessarily as much space. And when you put your stuff out to the curb at the end of the day, the stuff that takes up tons of space is the styrofoams and the large bulky items, and that's what fills your containers. So a 45-liter container for green bin collection on a weekly basis is tons. It's quite a bit. Well, it's 45 liters, but it should be quite ample, and I think it's the appropriate measure for us to go with.
Thank you. Looking to committee or visiting councillors, if there's anyone else who would like to comment on this. I see no one at the moment, and it has been moved and seconded. Okay, as the Ward 12 councillor who has the landfill within diversion that we can, also recognizing it's environmentally responsible. So eScribe will now be opening for your vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Thank you. Item 2.1, Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, inspection of the City of London's drinking water system. Mr. Mathers is with us if we have questions, but we did have a 100% rating. Councillor Turner declared a conflict on this, so I will need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Helmer, was that your hand up for a mover?
Yep.
Okay, and I had Councillor Van Merbergen as a seconder. Looking if there's any comments or questions. Seeing none, your vote will be now open and e-scribe.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0 with 1 abstain.
Thank you for that. We're on to item 2.17 in the consent item, which is the Dundas Place temporary bicycle lanes. If you'll take note in your added package, there are some added communications as well as a presentation from Mr. McCrae just to walk us through what has been considered already to make sure we start the conversation from the same place. So Mr. McCrae, I'll turn it over to you for your comments and then we'll see how committee wishes to proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the presentation is on the added, and I'm happy to screen share and to walk committee through it, if so desired. We'll pull that up. Is that visible?
It is. Please proceed.
Great. Okay, so it's just a brief presentation to review the contents of the report. So this starts with the 2021 core construction program, the most significant project of which is the phase 1 of the downtown loop construction. So this year it's on King Street. From Rideout to Richmond, it's lane restrictions. But from Richmond over to Wellington, it also includes the next phase of the downtown sewer separation. So the intensity of that work requires that the road be completely closed. So as such, there will be signed detours. The detours for motor vehicles will encourage drivers to use York Street, and that'll also be the detour route for transit buses. And the detour route for cyclists will encourage them to use Dundas Street. The other project worth noting is the Thames Valley Parkway Dundas Place connection project. It's on the last piece of Riverside coming up the hill towards Dundas Place, and that project will create a dedicated protected bicycle lane where it currently ends. Bring it right up to the intersection of Rideout Street. And it'll also create wider sidewalks to provide a better connection between the parks, the Thames Valley Parkway and Dundas Place. During the consultation for these projects, and particularly for the Downtown Loop project, the comments were received from cyclists regarding desire for improved cycling on Dundas Street. And it is acknowledged or anticipated that there's a potential for higher traffic volumes on Dundas Place during the 2021 construction season with the closure of King Street. So that led us to consider temporary cycling improvements along Dundas Place. So just reviewing the context of the 4 blocks of Dundas Place, it is a flex street with a posted speed of 30 kilometers per hour. And it's intrinsically traffic calmed with its unique design in that it has minimal pavement markings, a unique unit paving surface, and minimal fixed elements. And the intent there is to keep it adaptable for all different varieties of events and activations. It has lower traffic volumes. It's between 1,000 and 5,000, which is about half of the traffic volumes on the adjacent sections, west of Rideout and east of Wellington. In those where the traffic volumes are heavier in those adjacent sections, there are unidirectional bike lanes, protected bike lanes being implemented because of the higher traffic volumes and also speeds. Within Dundas Place, the design was really focused on creating opportunities for patios, pedestrians. So a minimization of the vehicle zone and expansion of the pedestrian zone to accommodate those as much as possible. And as such, so as shown in the plan view of this slide, the parking and loading zones are limited to isolated pockets at different locations along the street. And then just recently, during COVID, we're recognizing that a lot of businesses have had to pivot and relying more on pickup and drop-offs. And there's been some concerns raised with respect to vehicles parking in the vehicle lanes, also on the sidewalk areas. Concerns through the Back to Business portal with the businesses requesting additional pickup and drop-off zones. So as recently as the last few days, we're in the process of implementing a few more locations of pickup and drop-off zones across the downtown and also on Dundas Place. So the modifications to Dundas Place are not a standalone infrastructure project. However, it did include the evaluation of options. So all the options work within the narrow street that exists and would be implemented with temporary measures wherever possible. So this would include tape style pavement markings to make implementation quick and also to minimize permanent impacts to the unit paving that has that river street theme along Dundas Place. The options are also cognizant of the vision for the Flex Street as the #1 project in the downtown plan and the goal for it to be our premier event and activation gathering space. Obviously with COVID, event planning has been restricted. However, we continue to be cognizant of the vision. And so as opportunities for the Flex Street continue to be considered, we continually learn that fixed vertical infrastructure often limits the ability of the space for different potential uses. So therefore, all options that will be presented today do not include continuous barriers, similar to what is being implemented elsewhere in the downtown on our protected bike lanes. And this is acceptable from a design perspective, given the lower traffic volumes and lower speeds. And it retains the flexibility of Dundas Place as an event and activation space. And a widespread use of barriers also would require more impactful construction, requiring a removal of sections of unit pavers and anchoring barriers down into the underlying concrete base. So with that, the following slides review the viable options. So this first option reduces motor vehicle traffic to eastbound only. And then the north side of Dundas Place is converted to the eastbound and westbound bicycle lanes. And it includes only sporadic barriers in the forms of planters, just to sort of delineate the different the bike lanes versus the vehicle zone. So while all options meet design standards, this is the most preferable from the cycling design perspective because it avoids any mid-block crossings of vehicles across the bike lanes. However, it achieves this with the elimination of north side parking and loading zones, which we've heard is a concern for some businesses. It also requires additional traffic signal infrastructure, so that puts its costs higher than the others at $175,000. Option 2 also reduces motor vehicle traffic down to 1 lane eastbound only, and it uses the created space to create the eastbound and westbound bike lanes on either side of that motor vehicle lane. This alternative maintains parking on both sides, the parking and loading on both sides of the street. But in doing so, it does require the vehicles to cross the bike lane to access them. It does, when vehicles do park, as shown in the photo, they do tend to respect the tactile strip. So it does create a buffer space of 0.85 meters, which does reduce the risk of door zone impacts for cyclists in the bike lane. So this alternative also includes just sort of localized planter barriers, just more to delineate at the entrance to blocks to help the understanding of drivers and cyclists. So the cost of this alternative is predominantly related to the temporary pavement markings and is $30,000. Option 3, the traffic diversion, incurs no physical changes to Dundas Place. Rather, it imposes motor vehicle restrictions at either end to reduce the amount of through traffic on Dundas Place, and therefore making it a more comfortable cycling environment. So the schematic shown on this slide is an example of it illustrates how the through movement on Riverside Drive would not be allowed. And a similar condition would be implemented at the Wellington Street intersection to reduce through traffic along Dundas Place. Cost is predominantly related to signage and is only $5,000. And then finally, in response to comments made at the last Civic Works Committee, the do nothing option is also included. No physical changes to Dundas Place, and it would keep the mixed use environment that we currently have now through the construction season. So administration has provided the bylaw for the temporary unidirectional bike lanes for consideration while Dundas Place traffic is potentially busier during the 2021 construction season. However, I will reiterate that all 4 options laid out in the presentation and in the report are viable. So the recommendation considers expediency and cost. This recommendation also considers the input of the various perspectives that we've heard over the last several weeks. From business owners and operators, we received concerns about any disruption to Dundas Place after them going through the recent 2-year capital construction of Dundas Place. The need for additional pickup and drop-off locations and a desire for parking. From cyclists, we've heard concerns about traffic volumes and speeds on Dundas Place, and generally a preference for the bi-directional lane alternative. So thank you, Madam Chair. I hope that helps, and that concludes my presentation.
Perfect. Thank you for your presentation. Also of note, as I said, there are several communications that were added to the package in regards to this item. I will start a speakers list. I believe, Mr. Mayor, I'll start with you as you have your hand up.
Thank you very much, Chair. A few comments, if I can. This is more challenging than it first appears, but I'd like to understand a little bit more by way of background here. Mr. McCrae, can you tell me, please, as we're moving to increase cycling activity on Dundas Street, presumably from King Street, excuse me. Based on your studies, what did you come up with in terms of the amount of cyclist traffic daily?
Staff?
Yes, thank you through the chair. Yeah, the volumes along the King Street bike lane that would anticipate to be relocated over to Dundas Place, or in the order of 200 to 300 cyclists per day during the busy season. So that's, but the impetus, it's that combined with the potential for the additional motor vehicles that don't detour down to York Street and also use Dundas Place during the construction season.
But on the bicycles, you said they're about 200 to 300, sir?
Yes, that's the correct estimate.
Okay, thank you for that. I look at the options, and you know, it's interesting. I had spoken to the Barb Malley from the downtown BIA, and I guess a slight majority said that they preferred. I won't call it do nothing because that feels odd. I'll say no change as option number 4, and basically leave it as it is. But I'm mindful, as we all are, about how you incorporate those 200 to 300 cyclists in a safe way. And Barb also made the comment that the one of the concerns for cyclists was the issues around safety for them, and I get that. I also heard from cyclists who said that they didn't like the options that were on the table. By the way, I don't know if that was a unilateral position, but certainly some that I heard, there seemed to be dissatisfaction with that. And from a merchant standpoint, again, this is subjective, and insofar as I heard it from merchants who are very concerned about the ability for their delivery vehicles, be it food, be it just stock and supplies, to be able to do things without getting tickets, and to ensure that there was traffic there, vehicular traffic, to ensure their visibility was paramount. The other side I heard was King Street. That'll be perhaps a chat of another time, where they've literally been so challenged by initially the reconfiguring of King Street to COVID, and now with the loop, which we all understand has to be done. So I'm inclined to support the no change report, and appreciating that cyclists are considered vehicles in their own right, much more vulnerable. We get that, and respect that. And with the reduced speeds associated with Dundas Street and Dundas Place, I'm kind of hard pressed to go in another direction. So we'll all hear from colleagues about their views. And if it's appropriate, I'll put a motion on the floor to recommend option number 4, but not yet. I don't think that's appropriate till we get input from our colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Just for committee, Councillor Van Berbergen is the one who had pulled this item, and he's had to leave us at this point. I'm looking for any other questions or comments at this time. I will go to committee first. I do recognize Sean Lewis, Councillor Lewis will be on my speakers list. Just I'll recognize Councillor Turner as a committee member first.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm curious, if I might, just thoughts from staff on filtered permeability, and more specifically, actual filtered permeability, such as the King Street pilot in Toronto, which was quite effective in being able to maintain access to parking, access to loading zones, but decrease the traffic volume along that corridor in a way that allowed for efficient movement of transit. And in this case, we would look for it to be able to provide for the efficient movement of bicycles along that. And at the same time, not really impeding the intent of what Dundas Place is.
Okay, to staff, if you want to comment on the filtered permeability and the entrances to that as you might see them.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Seems like all my options are getting renamed, but the filtered permeability name for that option is also entirely appropriate. That's and it does take a nod to the King Street Toronto situation that requires forced right turns at every block. There's a variety of ways a whole bunch of different iterations of how this concept could be implemented on Dundas Place, and what's been put forward is one of those. But it does, as the councillors mentioned, it can work well for Dundas Place as a flex street, in that it can reduce, it can make a more comfortable cycling environment. Also, it's more comfortable for pedestrians, while still enabling the destination vehicles and the direct deliveries to get to their destinations. So whether it's implemented as part of this construction season mitigation, or even in the longer term, I do think there's potential there.
Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McCrae. I think certainly for the longer term, that's when we started talking about Dundas Place in the beginning, that's what I started thinking would be really reasonable for this, in order to be able to make sure that vehicles that needed to get there could get there, and that vehicles that were just passing through, they didn't use this as a pass-through. It's not supposed to be a pass-through. It's not the intent of this this stretch of 4 blocks. With respect to the cycling itself, I think the bidirectional lane is the most reasonable here. It addresses the safety concerns. The mayor was correct. It's not a high volume, high speed area, but the connectivity between the TVP and the the Riverside bike lanes, and all the infrastructure we're putting in place on Dundas, east of Wellington, that connection needs to be made. The Doreen prospect is a quite real one. Mr. McCrae, you showed the picture of people rather adhering to the delineations in the pavement, but every time I go down right now, it's just for lack of a better term, a bit of a gong show, the way people are parking along Dundas Place, and even with the bike lanes. I was coming down the bike lane westbound on the north side of Dundas, just around where the old city hall was. We've got the planters there, and a car had pulled right between the planters, right up to the curb, completely obliterating the bike lane and blocking it. People aren't getting it, and it's unfortunate. And so I think whatever option we choose needs to be clear. And if we create the unidirectional bike lanes, then we're going to have continued challenge with incursions into those lanes, either through parking, because people aren't going to pull right over. They're going to see this bike lane as a place they can stop and unload and all of that. By just keeping it clean and neat, and keeping the cyclists on the one side and the cars on the other side, it really drives that point home, and having the occasional planters to be able to delineate those two. I think we could look for opportunities to enhance loading zone and parking on the south side of the street, and that might address those concerns. But I think by far and away, the best alternative here is the bidirectional lanes. And failing that, or even in the longer term, I think we really need to be looking at filtered permeability. The last option, the traffic diversion, kind of talks to the first element of the filtered permeability, but it addresses it at the terminal ends of Dundas Place rather than at each block along the way.
Thank you. And just for the public, the bidirectional bike lanes is referring to option number 1. I will recognize Councillor Lewis at this point, and then Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is an interesting one. I actually share a lot of Councillor Turner's thoughts on whether we call it the traffic diversion or the filtered permeability. I actually like that as a better option in many ways moving forward. Not the least of which is, I think when we're diverting that cut through traffic, we are also enhancing for businesses along Dundas Place the quality of the patio experience, which we know is going to be in demand again this summer. It is certainly much more pleasant to enjoy the patio space when you're not breathing car exhaust fumes from vehicles stopped waiting for the intersections to clear. So I do like the diversion permeability option very much, and I also agree with Councillor Turner that parking on Dundas Place, I think that's a very fair description. It is a gong show right now. It's people are just parking wherever. They definitely are not getting it. And I am concerned that the directional lanes are just going to add to that problem and continue to be blocked. So I actually think that the diversion option is the better option. I think it enhances the opportunity for businesses to have sidewalk functions through the summer months, which are going to be in demand, whether that's patios or other activities, whether that's Attic Books or Heroes having a sidewalk sale on reading material, or other retailers maybe having some retail space expanding out in the summer months as well. I just think that it provides the better option. And I will say that I attended the Cycling Advisory Committee meeting where this item was discussed. There was certainly not unanimous consent on which option was better. I also had a chance following that to speak with the committee chair, Jameson Roberts, and again, we discussed and saw the benefits of the diversion permeability option as well. So I have to say, in discussion with the cycling community, as well as with some of the business owners, and admittedly, my engagement with the business owners has only been a few, but that option may work really well for both sides of the equation. And I know that there's lots of communications about, if it's not sort of barriered permanent, it's not good enough. Well, frankly, the staff communicated this over and over again at the advisory committee. This right now is a temporary move to deal with a construction season. So it is not going to be perfect any more than vehicle detours aren't perfect, or crosswalks and sidewalks being closed for pedestrians aren't perfect. That's the nature of a construction project. It's not going to be perfect for everyone. And, with due respect to the cycling community, they're going to have to accept that the construction diversion is not going to be perfect either. Does there need to be a longer term discussion about permanent connections? Absolutely. And that was acknowledged at the advisory committee too. But it's been said many times over the last couple of weeks by various members of this council. We can't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I think that there's a couple of options here that are reasonably good. I prefer the directional or the traffic diversion, but we'll see what colleagues say, and look forward to continuing this discussion at council as well.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Morgan.
Yes, and to Councillor Lewis, I think it's perfect is the enemy of done as the expression, but a point taken nonetheless. So I also had a chance to speak with Jameson about this as chair of the committee. And I would say this is not a debate that I think too many of us were looking forward to. The reason being that the construction of the downtown loop is just going to create a very difficult situation all around for traffic downtown, regardless of the type of mobility that you're talking about. So I don't think that there is a magic solution. And what I'm particularly looking for in the solution is something that's flexible, something that we can adapt over time, something that accommodates a little bit for everybody. And I think both the comments from Councillor Turner and Councillor Lewis, I would share. I know Councillor Turner prefers the bi-directional bike lanes in the short term. I think the traffic diversion or the filtered permeability is also a nice compromise position for the committee to consider for a couple of reasons that were already mentioned, but I'll reiterate one or two of them. One is by controlling the type of traffic that's coming down the street to be more localized for those visiting specific businesses or doing drop-offs or curbside pickup. You will limit the amount of traffic and potentially the speed of traffic, and hopefully make it much safer than those who are just speeding through to get to another destination. And I like the flexibility of you can filter at the ends of the route. You can put up permanent barrier, temporary permanent barriers. I mean, like actually something physical in the way to move the traffic rather than just signage. You can also, if it's not working the way we like, you can create filter points at each of the points along the route where you can move in and out. In other words, over the period of time, we can make adjustments to both manage the traffic flows around the core as well as the safety based on the number of cars participating on using Dundas Place. So I know that this is something that even as you know, I spoke with James about this. He said some members of the cycling community will not like this option. So, you know, there is not a good perfect choice here. And I think what I would encourage the committee to consider is something that works, something that's affordable, something that's flexible, and something that, you know, we can use as an adaptive tool if we need to make adjustments to it over time. Because again, this is temporary. It won't be the needed solution forever. And it also allows us to, as Councillor Turner said, this might be a good option for Dundas Place moving forward after all the construction is done, and it gives us a chance to test it to a certain degree. So I don't get a vote on the committee, but I leave those comments in the committee's hands, and I appreciate your work and consideration on this option. It certainly will be certainly a tough decision, this one, and I don't think you're going to please everybody. And I look forward to listening to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Morgan. I'll recognize Councillor Cassidy, and Councillor Cassidy is the last person on my speakers list at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions for staff. So first one, can you just tell us exactly when construction is expected or anticipated to begin? So when will the road closure start? And then I'm assuming that will go all the way until the snow flies at the end of the year. Will King Street continue to be closed and these options needed for any part of 2022?
To staff.
Construction on the core area projects will be starting soon, early April, so within the next couple of weeks. And the intensity of that, the eastern half of the downtown loop project with the sewer separation will require it to go for the entire construction season. That the closure, in recognition of business concerns, the closure will be limited to the two individual blocks and the intervening intersection, but essentially that construction and the impact to traffic within the corridor will last for the entire construction season.
And just to clarify, Mr. McCrae, construction season is basically till the snow flies.
Till the snow flies, and I just got a text, the construction is starting on April 5th. So I said within 2 weeks, so it's actually very, very near term, yes.
Perfect, thank you so much, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. So another question is, where will the cyclists go when Dundas Place is closed for events, as we expect to happen throughout the summer?
To staff.
Yeah, we're certainly hopeful, pending pandemic restrictions, that we are able to activate Dundas Place. So at that time, the cyclists are asked to dismount. As part of the east-west bikeway, identifying Dundas as the route, the Dundas Place was recognized as a destination within the corridor. The big preference to get cyclists, not to push them off into a corridor without destinations, but that was a big reason for the preference of Dundas. So it is a destination. If they want to continue along Dundas, and hopefully they're accessing locations in Dundas Place, they would dismount. If not, a cyclist would have an opportunity to find an alternate route, such as Dufferin, recognizing there aren't dedicated lanes, but it is sort of a calmer, quieter street.
Right. Okay, so thank you for that. I have some comments. First of all, I hear the concerns from the business community. I'm glad for the work that's going on with the City of London, the Back to Business group, working with the business community downtown to try to work around all of these issues. So from the drop-off zones and temporary parking zones and free parking and all of that stuff, designed to help businesses downtown not only recover from the effects of the pandemic, but also moving forward to make downtown and downtown businesses a success. So I get all that. I need to point out, cyclists are members of our community too. Cyclists shop too. Cyclists visit our downtown businesses, and I believe are more likely to stop and visit downtown businesses than somebody who's using Dundas Place as a through street, as Councillor Turner pointed out. It's not an ideal through street if you're a commuter looking to get from east to west in the city or vice versa. There are better routes, better alternatives for that commuter that's not looking to stop, not looking to make any stops. Cyclists are, professionals working downtown who've chosen this mode of transportation for their health, for the environment, for a number of reasons. I used to cycle to work every day when I lived in Toronto many years ago because I got there faster. It was a long distance. It was a half an hour cycling ride, but I was able to do it along the lake. It was more pleasant for me. I wasn't crowded standing up in a streetcar. So there are a lot of reasons why people choose cycling over an automobile, and getting around downtown is actually in many ways more convenient when you use a bike. So having said all that, this is a workaround solution that we're looking for. We hope to achieve the closest thing to perfection that we can, but even none of the options are actually perfect options. I wonder if staff had ever considered actually doing option 2, knowing that that wasn't necessarily the best option for the cycling community in there, or for many in the cycling community. But was there any consideration given to option 2 and 3 combined?
To staff.
Thank you, through the chair. We hadn't, it wasn't presented that 2 and 3 could be combined, but that is certainly an option. The option 3, the traffic diversion option, also considers restricting traffic coming westbound on the Wellington end. So with the reduction in option 2 to eastbound traffic, only that half of the diversion alternative would not be required. But certainly those 2 in a modified format could be combined.
Thank you. So, I think.
Sorry, Councillor Cassidy, you have 1 minute remaining, and then I'll have Councillor Helmer is waiting in queue as well.
Yep, thanks, Madam Chair. So that's what I would support, is some combination of option 2 and 3, recognizing that there are concerns from cyclists with their safety going with option 2 because of cars parking, because of cars crossing their lanes. But when you limit it to one-way traffic, and you also limit the cars that are actually coming on to Dundas Place, I think that makes, if we go with option 3, that also makes option 2 quite a bit safer for cyclists. So I don't want to stick with status quo. I think we have 200 to 300 cyclists using this east-west route a day, and I'm concerned for their safety. And I don't think it's something that we can toss to the wind and hope for the best. I think we have to do something to make this safer for them. And but I also think we risk losing everything if we push hard for option 1.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I just want to first build on what the Councillor Cassidy was talking about. I want to ask through the chair, how would access into the streets, if you're trying to go west into what is now a one-way road traveling east, it's filtered, say at the ride-out end, how would I get down to that part if I was a delivery vehicle, for example, if I can only go eastbound and there's no lane for me to go westbound? Seems like there might be a bit of a challenge in combining 2 and 3.
Mr. McRae.
Thank you. Yeah, I think The yeah, alternative 2 would eliminate any westbound traffic. So yes, there would not be any addition, or that would be all the restrictions at Wellington, and that it would preclude westbound travel onto Dundas Place. So there would be no overlapping of options at that end. It would only be overlapping of options at the west end, at the Rideout Street end, if I understood the question correctly.
Councillor Helmer, is that a follow-up or?
No, that's all I think I need to know, but I think we need to think through exactly how that would work. And I wanted to make sure I asked about it. I don't know, discussions are getting easier for me, I think, as time goes on. I have a prop, which I'm going to use. So this is a teeny tiny bike helmet for my daughter. And we just ordered a bike seat for her to go on our bikes so that we can bike around town with her. I don't know, like we're trying to decide what's the right cycling infrastructure to build so that people can get through downtown safely. It's pretty obvious what we should do. People can park a lot of places downtown. They can park and they can walk to where they want to go. Even delivery vehicles, you know, they can come early in the morning when they're not disrupting things. They can park on the north-south streets. They can access into buildings. There's lots of flexibility there. But I'm just trying to think, just from my own perspective, how am I going to bike from where I live over to the Thames Valley Parkway with my daughter sitting on the front of the bike wearing her fancy bike helmet safely? That's what a lot of cyclists are looking for. They're not just commuters trying to get to work, right? They're trying to get around the city with their families, and they want the safest possible way of doing that. So I don't know. I feel like when we were trying to weigh all these different factors, this is not an area where I'm really interested in compromising. I think the people who are in the safest position can walk a little bit further to get to where they're going. I do think the filtered permeability, sort of closing off the ends of the streets, that provides a lot of safety because it cuts down on the volume of vehicles so much. Only people who really need to get in there are going to be in there. And I do think it creates a much better place for a lot of reasons, like what Councillor Lewis was talking about and Deputy Mayor Morgan. I think in terms of a vibrant, livable spot downtown where businesses can kind of sprawl out into the Dundas place, that's what it's designed for, was so that it could be closed down like that, so you could restrict through traffic and create a much better place. So I think that'd be better for cyclists and better for a lot of other reasons too. So, you know, my preference is the bi-directional lane with some planters and things that are not, you know, expensive or difficult to attach to the road to divide the space. So you have vehicles going eastbound only and cyclists on the north side with a really great way to get through the core during the construction. I think if we try that this year and it's successful, that might be the longer term situation on Dundas Place too. Because you think about the future, we're going to have the downtown loop on Queens and King, and we have a lot of car traffic on York Street. And we will continue to have this problem of what is the safe way for cyclists to get through the core. We initially thought we were going to have the cycling route on Queens. And when we rerouted things and changed the rapid transit to being a couplet and a loop, that option came off the table, and we still have that problem. How are we going to get people through? We have a cycle track on the east side, and we have the great connection into the TVP, which we're building this year on the west side. And there's a straight line right through it, which is Dundas Place. And I think that's where even longer term, we should be having the safe cycling route through the core. It's direct. It's going to allow for cyclists to support all those businesses along the route to get down there very easily. Brings them right into the middle of the city. So I would support the bidirectional lane with the planters, the filtered permeability option with like physical barrier at the end, like a concrete block or something that's, or planters or something like that, that's going to stop people from just driving straight through. That I would also support. I think it's the second best option, but it's a good option. So I'll move the bidirectional lane with the planters occasionally sort of providing some protection along the way, and also the traffic diversion. And I can tell already that at council, we're going to have a spirited discussion about the idea. I think the committee can put forward 2 ideas and council can choose which one they're interested in. So I'll move both of them.
Okay, just for clarity, Councillor Helmer, you're moving option 1 being the bidirectional bike lanes and staff's original option 2 being the unidirectional bicycle lanes? Is that what's
Nope.
happening? That's not what's happening. Okay, just for clarity though, because the clerk's taking notes of exactly your wording that you're hoping.
Yeah, the first option is the bidirectional lane, so I'll move that one. And then the third option is the traffic diversion / filtered permeability. And the only thing I want to make sure we're clear about is that I think it needs some kind of physical barrier and not just like a sign that says you can't drive through here. I don't think that won't cut it.
Yep. Signs aren't infrastructure. Okay, so the clerk's just putting that together. I will also make committee aware that Councillor Van Merbergen and Councillor Turner have left us. So I'm not sure if committee would like to wait for the wording to be officially up or if someone's willing to second that at this time. Councillor Cassidy is seconding that. And we'll just wait for the wording to see if there's any comments or discussion around the motion that will be before you. We're just working on the wording as well as making note of the bylaws that will need to accompany this. If committee wishes to proceed with a discussion at this time before the wording's before you, I'm happy to. If not, I'm happy to wait as well. Councillor Van Holst, did you want to proceed with your questions before seeing the final wording?
I'd be fine doing that, Madam Chair. So just for clarification, people under this situation coming from the west, Riverside Drive, would be able to drive through Dundas Place east to and pass Wellington. If someone coming from Dundas in the east wanted to go and park their cars somewhere on Dundas Place, they would come down to Wellington. They would have to jog over to Queen Street, turn on to Rideout, and then come up from the west along that direction. Or anybody from the north would simply make their way to Rideout Street to turn up there. My question is about if you're coming from the south. I don't think you can access. I don't think Rideout has an access to Dundas from the south. Would we have to make the next street up one where you could turn north or turn west? Darn it, turn east. If we're coming north on, say, Richmond, would we have to allow people to turn east on Dundas in order to have some access from the south?
Okay, Mr. McRae, are you able to comment on southbound access to Dundas Place?
Yeah, so under the proposed option 3, vehicles are able to access Dundas Place via Clarence Street and Talbot Street. So under that scenario whereby a vehicle is coming from the east and they jog up to Queens Ave, could come down Clarence, or they could come down Talbot and turn on to Dundas Place Park. That option under the proposed scenario is also possible from Rideout Street, coming southbound on Rideout Street and turning onto Dundas Place. That was the intent with what was proposed. However, Councillor Helmer's suggestion of putting a barrier there is slightly more restrictive than what was proposed, in that it would completely block eastbound traffic in that westernmost block from Rideout over to Talbot. And then with respect to traffic coming from the south, yeah, they are not able to come up Rideout Street. Councillor Van Holst is correct, but they could access Dundas Place via Talbot Street primarily, Clarence Street also, but it will be subject to some closures during the upcoming construction season.
Okay, thank you. As long as there was an access somewhere near the west. So if you're coming from the north, you can access Dundas Place from Rideout Street. If you're coming from the south, if you could access it from, say, Talbot Street, then that would have access for people who do need to get there. Can I ask how this might affect people who are disabled and are traveling in vehicles that are dropping off a disabled person? What kind of impact will the strategy have on those people?
Okay, Mr. McRae.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very relevant question. The Accessibility Advisory Committee was consulted, and their primary concern from a visually impaired perspective is that all alternatives work within the tactile strip that is in the unit paving on Dundas Place. There is a number of accessible parking spots on Dundas Place, and depending on, there's typically one per block, and there's one high use one in front of the library that is on the south side, so that is unimpacted with all of these options. There are handicap parking spots at 2 locations on the north side that would be displaced with option 1.
Okay, and if I may, are those far enough from the parking spots on the south side that we should look to add more disabled parking on the south?
Yeah, they are in the eastern most 2 blocks. So the first block from Clarence to Wellington also has that high use, the high priority one near the library. But we could also, if option 1 were to proceed, look at adding an additional one in the Richmond to Clarence. That would take some review, because the parking spots on that block are also time for a certain time during the day loading zone. So we'd have to go through that in detail.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McRae. Councillor Van Holst, I will stop your questions there for the moment. For those on eScribe, the wording is up for you can see what we're discussing. I'll ask the clerk to read it out for those following online, and then I will recognize the mayor as the next speaker.
That options 1 being being bi-directional bicycle lanes, and 3 being traffic diversions, be forwarded to Municipal Council for consideration at the meeting to be held on April 13th, 2021, it being noted that the attached draft bylaws will implement these options.
Okay, Councillor Helmer, if this is not what you intended for wording, please let us know and we're happy to amend it. And at this time, I'll proceed with, Councillor Helmer, is that, just because you're on screen, are you pleased with the wording?
Well, I appreciate the clerk's trying to draft it up. I think that could work okay, but I think it might be simpler based on what I'm hearing from colleagues at committee is to just deal with these options, which are, they're kind of mutually exclusive. Either we're going to do one or the other. I don't think we're actually going to do both of these things. So to vote on the first one and see what committee thinks about it. And if it goes forward to council, we can see what council thinks about it. And then we can vote on the second one. We'll see what committee thinks about it. Either way, at council, we're going to have to choose one of these options. And I don't know that we're going to settle it by just forwarding the two on. We might as well forward all four. I just think it's helpful to, those are the two that I think are worth proceeding with. I think having some votes at committee about, do we want to go with the first one or the third one? I think that'd be helpful. If they both pass, I guess, then we would have to figure it out at council.
Okay, so we're looking at moving option 1 at this point, just to understand and see what committee feels about option 1 if it passes. Sorry, the clerk has a question. Just one moment, please.
Through the chair, we're just struggling a little bit with procedurally whether the committee is putting forward both options. I'm just still trying to work on the wording that the member is intending with this motion in terms of 2 options for council to consider, but if both are enacted by the committee, how we work that out. I'm just struggling a little bit with the wording, sorry.
Councillor Helmer?
Well, the committee, we can't enact anything, right? We're just going to make a recommendation to council, and we're going to, I think we're not going to pass both of these things. I just think we should vote on them separately. I think people have very clearly expressed different preferences, and I'm interested in the first one as my first preference. But I guess I could have just said, I'll move the first one and then we could vote on it. And then, I don't know, based on what I've heard here, it probably will fail. And then I could move the third one. But I just thought I'd get it over with and put them both on the floor at the same time so we could vote on them at the same time. But it doesn't seem to be speeding things up.
Okay, we're good. We're going to put 1 up, see what happens, and then we'll go from there. So as discussed, the first one would be option 1, bi-directional bike lanes. And we'll see what happens with that one. The wording is just being prepared for you. Mr. Mayor, did you want to make comment now or in a few moments?
Well, I'll just add some comments. I'm not sensing a lot of traction for option 4. And that's pretty clear. So when you look at the rest of the options, I was challenged by the physical limitations associated with planters or whatever on Rideout Street to prevent eastbound from there. So my inclination likely is to go with option 1 at this stage. That's it for now, Chair. Thanks.
If you hit refresh on eScribe, the wording's up, and I'll just ask the clerk to read it, and then eScribe will be open for voting.
That option 1 being bi-directional bicycle lanes be forwarded to Municipal Council for consideration at the meeting to be held on April 13th, 2021, it being noted that the attached draft bylaw will implement this option.
Okay, the vote is now opening in eScribe.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Councillor Helmer, did you still want to move option 3, seeing the result of option 1?
I'm not sure if option 1 is going to survive at council, but it's certainly up to anybody to move option 3 at council. And I think it's probably easiest to just leave it there. I'm happy to move it now, but they're both reasonable options, I think. One way or the other, I suspect from what Councillor Lewis and Deputy Mayor Morgan were saying is they're going to want to introduce option 3. I guess the advantage of introducing it now at committee would be it'd probably speed things up a little bit at council to have it on the floor as well. And I think that's fine. If option 1 gets defeated, for example, we'd just be done with the item instead of having to then introduce it and talk about it again at council. So I just looked at my colleagues on committee to see how you'd like to proceed.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anyone jumping in to raise it. Councillor Van Holst, I will not be recognizing you at this time. Mr. Mayor, if you have any wisdom to add, if not, I'm certainly fine leaving it with option 1 and they can scrap it out at council and I'll stand for 5 hours if that's what it takes.
I think wisdom sags as time moves on, Chair, but I would say to you that that if option 1 does not get through council approval, I'm quite confident that colleagues will put their other ideas. It doesn't limit them from putting the other options forward. And I think if we don't focus on one of them and either support it or get it out of the way, then I think what's going to happen is we're going to talk about all 4 options, and it will be longer than most planning environment committee meetings. And so respectfully, I would suggest we stay with option 1 and see where that takes us at council.
Perfect. Thank you for that. The clerk's is just preparing wording then to receive the staff report and the presentation and the added communications. We can finish up on item 2.17 and move forward. So I will be looking for a mover and a seconder for receiving the staff report, the presentation, and 3 added communications. I have Councillor Cassidy as a mover for that. I'm happy to second it. Okay, the wording's ready, and please turn your attention to eScribe.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Perfect. Thank you for that. We will be moving on to items for direction. There is several items before us. 4.1 is the second report of the Cycling Advisory Committee. On page 372, they had a request for a staff person, Ms. Weiss, or another alternate to occur at one of their meetings to answer some questions. So looking for if committee will allow that to take place, I would need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Cassidy?
I just wouldn't mind hearing staff's thoughts on what they are requesting.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm just looking for page 372 myself as I've shuffled my papers. Looking to see if the clerk, oh wait, did I find it? Oh my gosh, I found it. Okay, so item 6.2 out of the communication was looking for SY senior planner or delegate be requested to attend the next CAC meeting to provide additional details on the above noted notice, which was the official plan amendment for Masonville secondary plan. Are you looking for more clarification from a clerk or someone that was in that meeting, Councillor Cassidy?
Yeah, yes, Madam Chair, just from somebody, the clerk that may have attended the meeting, what exactly, why they want to see Ms. Wise in person to talk about that.
There's no one here at this time to provide that insight to you, Councillor.
I noticed Councillor Helmer had his hand up.
Sorry, Councillor Helmer.
The only thing I would say about it is we had the meeting at Planning Committee yesterday. So unfortunately, the advisory committee meeting, they make a request, it comes to the standing committee, then it goes to council, and by the time we deal with it, the meeting that's relevant, has passed. So I think we're kind of caught in a bit of a quandary in terms of the timing. I'm not sure how relevant the request is at this point since we've already had the meeting.
So would you like to deny the request as it's fallen out of time purviews, or just so we could respond to committee?
I think we can pass it. I just think it's going to be a difficult thing for her to do, go back in time and talk to them about the application. The redevelopment of Masonville continues. So, having somebody talk to them about what's happening, I think is reasonable. It's just that the secondary plan meeting has already happened in terms of the draft. It's not finalized.
If I may, Madam Chair, I was at the meeting.
Sorry, yes,
I think that okay. I think what Councillor Helmer is suggesting is what the intent was. I hate to speak for Cycling Advisory, but that there was a desire to talk further about the implementation of potential bike infrastructure in the general Masonville area as defined in the secondary plan. Planning had a number of reports come forward, but was unable to attend a couple of meetings. We have resolved that with our colleagues in planning. So there should be a planner for any report that goes to advisory committee in the future as well, who can answer those questions in advance of it going to PAC. But I think there still may be value in having that conversation with Cycling Advisory, knowing that that it's already gone through PAC last night.
Councillor Cassidy, you had your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move it. Even though there was the meeting at the planning committee last night, and we talked about the draft plan, there's still opportunity for them to give input, and there were concerns about some of the pathway connections brought by residents. So if Cycling Advisory Committee want to see some of those connections, give their input, I'm sure staff are fine with that, so I'll move it.
Thank you. Looking for a seconder. Councillor Helmer, and the vote is opening and inscribed.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. Item 4.2 as the added Imperial Road sidewalks submitted by our very own Councillor Cassidy. That communication is within your packages on page 375. So I'll turn your attention to the written word, and I'll turn it to Councillor Cassidy to speak to that Civic Administration be directed to report back to this committee with the results of the photometric study on Imperial Road and the detailed design of the proposed sidewalk on the east side of Imperial Road. Please proceed, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we had a number of discussions. I had a number of discussions with the city engineer between the last committee meeting and the council meeting, and discussed the possible options for Imperial Road. And during that whole time, we always considered the move to the opposite side. We thought that would result in fewer loss of trees, and both the city engineer and I imagine Councillor Helmer, since it had been his motion, we were all surprised at the very last minute when we heard the estimate of tree loss if we were to go in this direction and move the sidewalk to the other side of the street. And it sounded like there would be additional trees lost by making this move. Our intent had always been to save more trees by moving the sidewalk to the other side of the street. So again, I've had additional conversations with the city engineer. There needs to be a photometric study that's done to determine whether or not streetlights have to be moved and what the impact of that will be. They expect the photometric study to take place later in the year, which will most likely mean no work will be done on Imperial Road this year. So knowing that we have this extra time, I've, again, with consultation with the city engineer, asked that we have the result of this photometric study before we continue in this direction. And there is a last part of my motion that's actually missing from this. And I was going back and forth with the clerk, so it's understandable that something got missed. But at the end of Imperial Road, I wanted to add the words prior to tendering or commencing work. So that was supposed to be included in there as well. Just that last little part right after Imperial Road, the words prior to tendering or commencing work should have been added.
Perfect. Thank you. That is being added into the motion now, and I assume you're moving this?
I'm moving that, and I'm hoping somebody from committee will second.
Okay, looking into committee for a seconder. Councillor Helmer. Okay, I see no hands up for discussion. If you want to discuss it, we certainly can, and if not, the vote is ready and e-scribe. Okay, seeing no eager hands, the vote is opening before you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. We have one last item for direction being 4.3, relocation of sidewalk construction fund, reallocation of sidewalk construction funds submitted by Councillor Van Holst. This is on page 376 of your package. The councillor is with us today, but for the public, it says that the Civic Administration be directed to transfer any budgetary savings resulting from proposed sidewalk infrastructure being removed from the related 2021 road reconstruction projects and the new sidewalk construction program. Councillor, if you would like to speak to this, recognizing you are a guest at this committee, and then we can go to committee or staff for comment.
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, of course, at our last council meeting, we created some budgetary savings by exempting some construction project from sidewalk installation. If we transferred those funds into the new sidewalk program, we could continue to address the needs for accessibility and potentially with greater impact, because sidewalks remain an important tool to enhance mobility and accessibility. And our new sidewalks program is designed to prioritize those installations where they're most needed. So recognizing that, I hope the committee would consider that motion.
Thank you for that. Looking to committee for their will of how they would like to proceed with the correspondence before us. Or if
Question, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much. Through you to staff. When typically we have monies not spent by whatever reason, what happens to the funds? Do they not go back into our capital budget? What exactly happens with that, please?
To staff.
Thank you, through the chair. For an annual program like the neighborhood street reconstruction program, the needs as identified through our capital asset management program, there's a backlog there. So if money goes unspent one year, it'll be carried forward to a following year, and we'll just be able to whittle away at the backlog of needs in a future year.
So thank you for that. And so through you, Chair, does that mean, if I've heard that correctly, that the approach, while well-intentioned, might not be necessary because you will take unspent resources and put it back into the program anyway?
Mr. McRae?
That's correct. Those savings would go to a future year towards broad neighborhood reconstruction, street reconstruction projects, which may include sidewalks or not. The redirecting of funds as proposed in the motion would ensure that the monies go directly towards a new sidewalk installation. So a couple of different ways that both contribute to valuable infrastructure.
Mr. Mayor?
Chair, thank you for that, Mr. McCray. So what it sounds like to me is that if we did this, if we focused specifically on sidewalks, and as we consider our next capital projects associated with roads and sidewalks, if we had that excess funds, we wouldn't require putting as much into sidewalks. We'd probably put more into roads. It feels, again, well intended. So I salute the councillors for that, but not necessary. That's kind of my instinct on that. Is that a fair comment?
Mr. McCray?
Yeah, yes, we can. I mean, we'll continue to try to deliver our neighborhood street reconstructions in a complete streets manner, and we're going to be brainstorming ways to make that process easier for both administration and council. And so keeping these funds in the current budget will enable them to be spent on future complete streets reconstructions.
Thank you for that, Mr. McCray. Looking to committee for other speakers or a motion of how you wish to proceed. Councillor Van Holst, as a guest, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate you chairing our committee. I think the difference here is that by passing this motion, we'll make sure that we will not have spent any less on sidewalks than was originally intended this year. So for those who are very concerned about sidewalks for accessibility, we'll make sure that all the monies that were originally delineated for sidewalks will go to sidewalks. So otherwise, they could go to any kind of street construction project, as the mayor pointed out. And and that may or may not be for sidewalks at all. But this was to, I guess, honor the people that were very concerned about us removing these funds from sidewalks. This is a way to put those back in places that are very targeted for need.
Thank you for the comments and clarification of your intention. Councillor Cassidy, I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to staff. Can you let me know how many, under the current budget that we have, how many sidewalks are we able to install under the warranted sidewalk program? And how long is the list right now of streets that are waiting for sidewalks?
To staff.
Thank you. Yeah, we actually renamed the program the new sidewalk programs because all sidewalks are warranted. So that's just something I'd like to remind on. But we in that program, it's currently got 550,000 funding per year, and that typically enables about 4, maybe 5 different segments of sidewalk, depending on the length and cost of them. So the waiting list for that program is quite long. It's about 2 pages long. So that's not very scientific, but that I think we probably have at least 60 sidewalk sections in the waiting list for that program. Thank you.
Follow up, Councillor Cassidy.
I see where the councillor is going with this, and I'm supportive of building more sidewalks all over the city. And I do know of areas that have been waiting for sidewalks, and they would like to see them go in. That doesn't mean that I give up on the other program where we're putting them in areas where we are building new road, where we're reconstructing the roads and doing major infrastructure projects. I kind of like this idea. Because every time we don't get a sidewalk where we absolutely need one, but where we get a lot of pushback and for whatever reason, the sidewalk project doesn't go through. I do like the idea of that money being used for a sidewalk somewhere. So, you know, I'm going to move Councillor Van Holt's motion. If I don't know if I have a seconder, but I'll move it.
Okay, thank you for that. Looking for a seconder on the motion before us. Okay, I'll second it. Opening it up for questions or comments. My question to staff would be recognizing this year we had some sidewalks that didn't go forward. I believe we had 500,000 as the sidewalk component of the issues that we dealt with last week at council. Looking to know if you could ballpark roughly how much money we're talking about of potentially transferring to this new sidewalk construction program for 2021.
If I may, Madam Chair, and then Mr. McRae can answer that in detail. It would be unlikely for us to be able to accomplish any new sidewalk construction under that program in 2021. There is design that needs to happen, there's neighborhood consultation that needs to happen, and there's tendering and contracting that would need to happen. So while the money certainly could be spent, we would want to carry it forward and potentially spend it in 2022 and or 2023. Mr. McRae can answer about how much extra kilometerage we can accomplish with the 500,000.
Mr. McRae?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I thought it was how much funds would be transferred, but was it
yes.
Length sidewalk?
No,
okay.
Money.
Okay, yeah, so the rough estimate of the sidewalks to be implemented in the program was 500,000. And with the sidewalk proceeding on Imperial and Paymaster, Elm, so on a few streets, so it would be slightly reduced. So I would estimate about 400,000 would be the value of the transfer.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Helmer, you had your hand up, I think.
Yes, you beat me to seconding motion very quick from the chair seat. I wanted to ask about the money side. It wasn't clear to me exactly how much the financial impact of those changes was going to be. And also I wanted to comment about the practicality of trying to design and construct a project starting at the end of March with additional funds. And unfortunately, these projects have long lead times, and the design work, I think we underestimate how much work goes into the front end of the project, and it can't just be accelerated from nothing to hit the ground in the year that we're talking about. So that's the unfortunate reality of stop and start and back up and start again approaches. So I support the idea of transferring it into the sidewalk program. I think that that's appropriate. It's going to help us close in more of those gaps. There's lots of them, unfortunately. I did have a question, and I don't really need a super precise answer if it's not available. Perhaps I can get it clarified before council, but you know, there's a fairly big difference between doing a sidewalk on its own outside of a reconstruction project and a sidewalk as part of a reconstruction project. So I don't want us to get the sense that we can get the same number of meters of sidewalk per dollar as we would with a reconstruction. And if Mr. McRae, if you have some kind of rule of thumb or some kind of estimate, especially when it comes to design work, like the design work has to happen one way or the other. The construction, the materials, the concrete and all that stuff would be the same price, but the design work just being for a sidewalk is a lot for one little project. And I wonder if you could just comment about the difference because it's not exactly apples to apples.
Thank you for that, Mr. McRae, or anyone else who wants to reply.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It's a valid point in that there are efficiencies when there's a larger contract So that in that so many of the fixed costs, like mobilization of construction equipment and labor and the whole design process, those fixed costs are set regardless of whether it's we're reconstructing the entire street and they get spread amongst many different items, or if they're specific to a smaller scope project, if it's just a standalone sidewalk implementation. I don't have specific data that would take some homework, but I'm willing to estimate as probably a 15 to 20% cost difference between the two scenarios, if that helps.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further hands raised, if you would like to raise something, please do. If not, the wording is ready in eScribe and we can turn your attentions to the screen.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you for that. Moving on to the deferred matters list, the mayor has declared a conflict on this. 5.1, looking for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. It is opening before your eyes. Sorry, it's the magic of technology and eScribe. That is all I have for you today. I thank everyone for their time. Oh, Councillor, do you have an emergent motion or something fun?
Nothing quite that exciting. I just have a question under additional business for
Yes.
staff.
Please proceed.
And this is on behalf of Councillor Salee. We are very close to this area, both of our wards, and he wanted me to ask about the intersection at Highbury and Edge Valley and the traffic signal that's planned for that intersection and whether there's any possibility of speeding it up. I know that right now it's planned to be constructed sometime in 2022, and I just wanted to ask staff about prospects for accelerating that timeline.
Thank you to staff for any clarity around acceleration or pinpointing when in 2022.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that is next cycle. Civic Works Committee will see a report approving new signal and pedestrian crossover locations. Highbury and Edge Valley intersection is one of those. We will I'll need to review it in detail to see whether an acceleration is possible, but I'm not optimistic. I'm anticipating that there's likely budget restrictions, but also the time frame for the design. But certainly happy to go back and revisit that with the team. We know that's a high priority location, and yes, to confirm, it is currently planned for 2022 construction.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. So that's our next report coming to CWC for April 20th. We'll keep an eye out for that, and grateful to hear anything from Councillor Sally as well as that comes forward. If there's any further additional business, please state so now. Seeing none, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Helmer moves it. Councillor Cassidy seconds it. We can hand vote that one. Everyone who wants to proceed with adjournment, that's unanimous. Thank you everyone for your time today, and have a great week.
Thanks, Madam Chair.